There are moments in life that leave us questioning everything we thought we knew. This is one of those moments, and it's a story every parent needs to hear. Imagine a seemingly innocent evening when a simple conversation between a child and their mother spirals into a situation no one could have predicted. What if the words a child speaks to their mother set off a chain of events that forces everyone involved to confront deep, uncomfortable truths? Meet Sarah, a loving mother, who has always tried her best to protect and guide her 12-year-old son, Ethan. Their bond is strong, built on years of trust, and Sarah believes she knows her son better than anyone. But that night, everything changed. As they sat down for dinner, Ethan's sudden, tense silence caught Sarah off guard. When she asked him what was wrong, his words shocked her to her core. Without hesitation, Ethan accused a man she had known for years of something unimaginable. The words echoed through the room. "Mom, he's different. You shouldn't trust him." At first, Sarah dismissed it as the thoughts of a child trying to understand a complex world. But as the evening wore on, doubts began to creep in. What if Ethan had seen something that Sarah hadn't? What if his words weren't just childish fears, but a warning she couldn't afford to ignore? As a mother, Sarah was faced with an impossible dilemma. Should she protect her son from his own fears, or should she trust his instinct no matter how confusing it seemed? But this wasn't just a story about a mother and her child. It was about something much deeper, something that would challenge everything Sarah thought she understood about trust, love, and the very nature of parenthood. As Sarah dug deeper into Ethan's accusation, she began to uncover shocking truths about her own past, connections she had long forgotten, and a hidden world her son had unknowingly stumbled into. The more Sarah searched for answers, the more questions piled up, each one darker and more unsettling than the last. What did Ethan really see? Why did his words carry such weight? And what would Sarah do when the truth came crashing down on her, revealing secrets that would forever alter the course of their lives? Stay tuned, because this story is just beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Every parent should watch this because the lessons within it might just change the way you see your own family, your own choices, and the future of your children. The truth is waiting, and it's about to be uncovered. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan's words kept replaying in her mind, each time sounding more real, more pressing. She had always prided herself on being a good mother, someone who understood her child deeply. Yet, in that moment, she realized how little she truly knew about the world Ethan was living in. Was it possible that he had seen something she hadn't? Or was it all just a child's fear taking on a life of its own? Sarah decided to confront the man Ethan had accused. It wasn't something she wanted to do, but the doubt in her mind was growing too strong. His name was James, a longtime family friend who had been part of their lives for years. James had always been a reliable and trusted figure, someone Sarah had never imagined could be involved in anything remotely troubling. But then again, Ethan's accusations seemed too specific to ignore. The next morning, Sarah invited James over for coffee. She tried to keep her composure, but there was an undercurrent of tension she couldn't shake. As James walked through the door, she noticed his usual charm was gone. He seemed distracted, almost on edge, and that made her uneasy. "Hey Sarah, how's it going?" James greeted, forcing a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been better, actually," Sarah replied, trying to sound casual. She led him to the kitchen, offering him a seat. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's something I need to ask you, James. It's about Ethan." James stiffened at the mention of her son's name. Sarah's heart raced, sensing that this conversation was going to reveal more than she was prepared for. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign that would tell her what was really going on. "Ethan said something last night that, well, it's bothering me," she continued, carefully choosing her words. "He said he doesn't trust you. He seemed really upset, and I don't know what to make of it." There was a long pause. James didn't immediately respond. His eyes flickered to the side, avoiding her gaze. James sat back, his face clouding over with something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, but something darker, something Sarah hadn't seen in him before. "I'm not sure what to tell you, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "Kids say things sometimes, things that don't mean anything." But Sarah wasn't convinced. There was something in his tone, something that didn't add up. Ethan's words felt too real, too urgent to dismiss as mere child's play. Sarah felt a sudden surge of protectiveness for her son, and it pushed her to dig deeper. "I know my son, James. I've raised him, and I know when he's scared," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Something's not right. I need you to tell me the truth." James's eyes darkened, and for a split second, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of guilt. Then, just as quickly, he stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I think it's best if we leave this conversation here," he said, his tone sharp now. "You've always been too protective of Ethan. He's just going through a phase. Don't make it more than it is." Sarah watched him leave, her mind spinning with questions that only seemed to multiply. Why was James so defensive? What did he know that he wasn't saying? And most importantly, what had Ethan seen that caused him to react this way? The feeling of unease only grew stronger. There was something hidden beneath the surface, and Sarah wasn't about to let it slip away without answers. She knew she had to get to the bottom of it for Ethan's sake, but where would she even start? What could she uncover that would explain her son's fears? As Sarah stood by the window watching James leave, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if Ethan was right all along? And what if the truth was far more dangerous than she ever imagined? The mystery was just beginning, and Sarah's search for answers was about to take her down a path she couldn't have foreseen. The days that followed James's abrupt departure were filled with a quiet unease. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial that would explain Ethan's fear and James's strange reaction. She found herself replaying every interaction she had ever had with James. Every word, every glance, trying to decipher a hidden meaning. But the more she thought about it, the more tangled the web became. Ethan remained distant, retreating into himself. He would barely speak, his once lively demeanor replaced by a constant sense of worry. Sarah tried to approach him gently, but he would shut her out, insisting that everything was fine, despite his restless nights and the haunted look in his eyes. She knew her son better than anyone, and the cracks in his calm facade were impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Sarah's mind raced with troubling questions. Had Ethan truly seen something that he wasn't ready to understand? Or was he just reacting to the pressure of a world that didn't make sense to him? Was there something she had overlooked in their seemingly perfect life? She couldn't ignore the possibility that maybe, just maybe, James wasn't as innocent as he appeared. The more Sarah dug into the situation, the more complicated things became. She started noticing strange details she had previously brushed off. Small things, like how James would always change the subject when certain topics came up, or how he would vanish for hours at a time, with no explanation. Every unanswered question seemed to lead to more questions, and every clue felt like a piece of a puzzle she wasn't sure she was ready to solve. The tension was thick, and Sarah knew the truth was within reach. But every step forward only seemed to push her further into a maze, with no clear exit in sight. She had to find out what James was hiding before it was too late. But would the truth be something she could bear? As the days passed, Sarah's obsession with finding answers grew. Her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner of her vision, seemed to whisper of something ominous. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. If she didn't uncover the truth soon, something far worse might happen. Ethan's behavior continued to spiral, and Sarah's attempts to comfort him only seemed to drive him further away. His once bright eyes were now clouded with fear, and his outbursts became more frequent. The tipping point came late one night when Sarah heard a muffled sound coming from Ethan's room. Her heart raced as she quietly opened the door, only to find Ethan sitting on his bed. Ethan's words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had always known her son was perceptive, but now he was speaking as if he had seen something that she couldn't comprehend. Her mind raced, but before she could press him for more details, there was a knock at the door. It was too late for any of it to be a coincidence. She opened it cautiously, her breath catching in her throat as she saw James standing there, a strange look on his face. "I think it's time we talked," he said, his voice low and steady, but Sarah could hear the edge of something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Sarah's pulse quickened as she stood frozen in the doorway, staring at James. His face was calm, almost too calm, and his eyes held a look that made her blood run cold. Ethan, still shaking on the bed, looked at Sarah with a mix of fear and pleading, as if begging her to understand something she couldn't yet see. "James, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked, her voice strained, though she tried to sound composed. James didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "I think we need to clear the air," he said, his tone more forceful now. "There are things you don't understand, things Ethan doesn't understand." The air in the room felt heavier, as if every word James spoke was adding weight to the suffocating tension. Sarah could sense that whatever he was about to say would change everything. She stepped back, her instincts telling her to be careful, but the door was already wide open, and James was crossing the threshold. Ethan whimpered, clutching the edge of his blanket, as if trying to shield himself from something invisible but terrifying. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't trust James anymore, not with everything that had been happening. But what was he really here to do? Before she could ask another question, James's gaze darkened, and the room seemed to grow colder. James stepped into the room, his eyes cold and calculating. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from him, instinctively drawing Ethan closer. The fear in her son's eyes was enough to solidify everything she had been suspecting. Something was horribly wrong. "You think you know everything, don't you?" James said, his voice suddenly laced with venom. "You think I've been hiding something from you, but you have no idea what's really been going on." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth was far worse than she imagined. "What have you done to him, James?" she demanded, her voice shaking with both anger and fear. James didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a twisted, knowing smile. "Nothing yet, but soon you'll understand." Suddenly, there was a sharp knock on the door, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Before Sarah could react, two men in dark suits appeared in the doorway, their presence commanding and intense. "You're too late, Sarah," James said, his grin widening as he turned to the men. "She was never supposed to find out." As the men advanced toward her, Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her. What had she gotten herself into? But before she could protest, the men spoke in unison. "It's time to finish what you started, James." The twist hit like a gut punch as Sarah realized. James wasn't the threat. He was part of a much larger game, and she and Ethan were caught in the middle. Sarah's mind raced as the two men stepped closer, their cold eyes locked on her, while James watched with a sinister calm. Her entire world was unraveling. She had believed she was protecting Ethan from something dangerous, but now it seemed they were the ones being manipulated. The words, "You were never supposed to find out," echoed in her mind, as she realized this wasn't just about James. It was about something much larger, something far darker than she could have imagined. The men reached her, but before they could act, Ethan, his face pale and determined, stood between her and them. "No," he said firmly, his voice shaking but resolute. "You're not taking her." The men paused, surprised by Ethan's courage. But then, one of them smiled, a grim look of recognition crossing his face. "So, you finally figured it out," he said. "It's too late for both of you." But just as Sarah thought all hope was lost, a loud crash echoed from the back door, and a